With a swift tilting motion, the spade revealed a small hole, into which fell a thin metal tube capped with a flashing light. Just as quickly as it entered, the spade withdrew from the soil, and the boot that forced it in now pressed the earth back down. Not that it would matter how the soil looked, or if the obvious mound of dirt was noticed, the enemy wouldn't care. "Please don't pop yet," the man muttered under his breath, stepping on the small mound and continuing on his way. As the lanky man, robed in a mix of leathers, cloth, and metal plates, continued placing a grid of remote detonated thermobaric charges into the ground, he couldn't help but marvel at the serene beauty around him. The seemingly endless hills of purple grass, interspersed with massive ferns and mushroom-like trees, reminded him in some ways of his home planet. Home planet, but not homeworld, a concept of home that differed greatly for his people compared to many other species in the galaxy. A homeworld was the planet a species evolved on, while a home planet or home station referred to the body they were born on. It had been 60 generations since this man's people were stolen from their true home, forbidden to return for fear of cultural and technological contamination, and forced to integrate into an uncaring galaxy. Of the few who seemed to care, it was clear many viewed his people as little more than potentially useful. Offers of aid often served as speculative investments in his people's future, aiming to secure profit or personal gain. The galaxy labeled them Deathworlders of Deathworlders, claiming they evolved on a world so hostile that even other Deathworlders would fear setting foot on it. Some believed the deadly gifts from their homeworld made them valuable to these Gebdai, these aliens. The Nishnebi humans had never heard that word before, knew better than to trust those who offered with one hand while keeping the other behind their back. Of the hundreds who could have done something, only a select few helped these stolen people out of genuine kindness. The Kiai-Mayak, a relatively short, semi-aquatic, semi-bipedal mammalian species covered in thick watertight fur with a particular tail structure and sharp foreclaws, were genuinely kind souls. They helped that first generation of stolen people by gifting them a new world with similar, though milder, environmental conditions. They provided food production systems, resources, tools that would take millennia to produce independently, and the education necessary to keep those early generations safe in this harsh galaxy. To those first generations and all who followed, the Kiai-Mayak were the Jadzamek, the friendly beavers, and the two species remained close allies. "I will never see an actual beaver in person," the man thought painfully, a thought that had been entering his mind more and more recently. He wasn't sure if it was his age or the stress of the growing conflicts across the galaxy causing these thoughts, but his soul was starting to feel the pain that so many of his elders had felt. He had seen many worlds, met many different species, and participated in events some could only dream of, yet something deep inside him still felt missing. At this point, the pain and rage from those thoughts were among the few things motivating him to keep going in his present situation. He was on the homeworld of his people's closest friends and allies, participating in a global effort to burn away all the biomass on this planet. Every last speck of life needed to be completely wiped out, lest it be used against them later. Billions of years of evolution, and all its results on this planet, would soon be nothing but flames, all to deny a seemingly infinite enemy just one small meal. In a purely rational sense, it didn't matter if they burned it all away, because the devourer mass would have just consumed it all anyway. There were only a few days left until the mass would be close enough to eject landing spores, and when that happened, it was all over for life on this planet. Once the spores of the devourer took root, the only way to cleanse the planet was with fire. The only saving grace was that the devourer could not convert inorganic matter into organic matter. Though this fact likely drew the masses towards systems with large amounts of life, it also hindered their ability to grow and produce. Inorganic matter was everywhere, organic matter was rarer and jealously guarded. There was a belief that if the masses could be prevented from gaining more biomass, they could be permanently destroyed eventually. Lost in thought for many hours now, the man nearly missed the sight of the pair of suns slowly beginning to set on the horizon. The blending light from the differently toned glowing bodies created beautiful patterns across the clouds. One red sun and one blue sun slowly lowered closer to the horizon, a display of colors so vibrant and intense that the majesty of it nearly brought a tear to the man's eye. Remembering that this was one of the last sunsets life on this planet would ever see, however, did bring that tear. He didn't bother to wipe it away and simply stopped to stare for a moment until he heard the rustle of feathers and someone shouting his name. "Tens. Hey Tens, there you are. I've been looking all over for you. The commander back at base says you've been at this for 2 days straight. You need some sleep, man." The translator in Ten's buzz's ear turned the series of chirps and whistles of the Shi-Si Krokek language into his mother tongue. As the iridescent purple-feathered, Four-winged avian gracefully landed a few paces away. His look of genuine worry was obvious. Tens could usually understand their language well enough without the translator, but it did help him pick up on the subtleties his human ears couldn't. However, having grown up with the bird, Tens immediately recognized the facial expressions. "Aho, Binko. It's good to see you, but I was hoping you would have already been on a transport out of this system by now," Tens replied with a cheerful tone. "Don't try to change the subject. I'll be on whatever transport you're on." Binko retorted, his squawks and chirps conveying a mix of annoyance and sincere concern. "You're my friend. I'm not about to leave you with a devourer mass incoming. I was worried you had collapsed from exhaustion and would be left behind." When Tens people were stolen from their home, they may not have had many friends. But now that they had proven themselves far more than simple primitives forced into the galaxy far before their time, they had formed many bonds with other species. There were also many who never got over their distrust and fears. "Hey, don't worry so much about me. You know us Anishinaabe are Deathworlders," Tens said with palpable sarcasm in the last word. "The gravity here is so low I feel like I could fly. The only exhaustion I'm feeling is from a lack of exertion." Tens shot a playful wink at his avian friend while flapping his two arms, mimicking Binko's wings. "Besides, there's only one sector left. I should be done in a couple hours. Hey, I don't care how many feathers you put in your hair, you're way too dense to fly." Binko laughed, stretching out three of his four wings wide and tapping his head with a claw from the fourth. "But if you're almost done, then I'm going to go back to the shuttle and get it ready. As soon as I'm ready, I'm coming to pick you up, and that's not a choice. Don't make me call Axika and have her come down here and drag your ass off this planet." "Don't you threaten me with a good time," Tens quipped as the two shared a hearty laugh. Tens got himself back under control and added, "But let's not bother her. She's already under way too much stress with everything going on right now." After a quick parting exchange, Binko flew back to the shuttle port, and Tens continued with his task. He reminded himself that none of what he was doing was even really necessary, but it made him feel better to leave a present for their coming guests. The spirits of this planet and all the life it had mothered would be avenged, even if that meant all would be consumed in flames. All he could do now was continue with his futile task and pray to the spirits of his true home, the world he had never known, in hopes of a miracle. With both suns now fully set and the stars visible, Tens wondered if he could see the star that had birthed his species. Even if he couldn't, the night sky was beautiful this evening. Tens said a silent prayer for his friends and the loss they would soon feel. Several tens of thousands of small identifier symbols danced throughout a 3D representation of a binary star system. Two stars of similar size but slightly different colors orbited each other, 7 planet-sized bodies orbiting the barycenter of those suns, and a few dozen moon-sized bodies orbited the planets. With nearly every celestial body, void ship, and satellite in this three-dimensional live representation of the system shown at once, it would be easy for anyone to get lost in it all. The mass of symbols surrounding one particular body began to thin as those symbols started to move away from the planet and disappear off the sensors. Another wave of transport ships was breaking system and traveling to the various systems, taking on the refugees. Simultaneously, near a barren, airless rock of a planet, hundreds of symbols kept a safe distance from an object the size of a small moon. This object seemed to defy the laws of gravity as it moved further into the system. The evacuation was nearly complete, and the devourer mass was still about 2 days from arriving in range of the planet currently swarming with evacuation ships. Many admirals would be proud of themselves, or possibly even bragging, over the speed and efficiency in which the operation had been conducted. However, this admiral was far more humble, and the refuge evacuation side of things wasn't necessarily her responsibility. She had trusted her subordinates to function like a well-oiled machine. Even if she was the admiral of the fleet, and she had been the one to accept this contract nearly pro bono, her pride sat firmly in how well those around her performed their functions. While one massive group of many different symbols shifted away from the planet, another group was making another run at the mass to try to reduce it as much as possible. The dance between the harbinger of death and the uniform set of symbols had been playing out on this display for nearly the past week. As soon as the devourer mass had exited subspace on the border of this system's magnetosphere, the interdiction detachment of her fleet had been making runs against it. The hope was to reduce its mass as much as possible before it could reach planetfall. In theory, it was possible to completely destroy a devourer mass before it could release spores onto a planet and begin the process of consumption. However, it would take a fleet multiple orders of magnitude larger than hers to accomplish that. Despite days of vicious attacks with nearly the entire diversity of the mercenary fleet's armament, the mass had been reduced by less than 5%. It was the size of a small moon, after all, producing its own plasma magnetosphere akin to high-grade energy shielding, and covered in an organic crystalline chitin that required concentrated fire to penetrate. 5% mass loss should have been something to boast about. This admiral, however, didn't need another notch on her staff or deeply indebted people to sing her praises. All she wanted was to make sure her stubborn, obstinate, and heedless partner wasn't doing something stupid. I will personally sever that mass's synaptic control organ with my bare hands if it so much as she didn't dare finish that thought. That man is going to be the death of me, she sighed, the words slipping out without even thinking. Excuse me, Mom, the question came from just within her peripheral vision, though she couldn't remember how long the being had been standing there. Report, she said without turning her head to look at whoever had just addressed her. Yes, Admiral. The final group of refugees is boarding the evacuation shuttles now. The only sentients not currently queued to get on our shuttles are those who have their own. Estimated time to full evacuation operation completion within 2 hours. The relatively small insectoid gave its report in a clear, yet synthesized voice. All of the Tomian subspecies, of which this being was a Shia Tomian, were classified as a hive mind species because they could directly communicate between individuals through a poorly understood form of quantum entanglement. Despite this, each individual was unique, and it wasn't unheard of for a single Tomian to be seen plying the stars with a sense of wanderlust. This one, however, was one of the best logistics officers an admiral could hire. Excellent. You bring your clan and species great honor with your actions over the past week. The admiral looked away from the holographic display towards the insectoid, giving the being an earnest nod of approval. Though the compliment didn't take into consideration that the Shia Tomian have neither a clan system nor a particularly strong distinction between them and other species, it was received with this species' equivalent of an honored bow. Without waiting for a response, or even expecting one, she allowed her gaze to return to the display, still zoomed in on the lightning run one of her squadrons was making. Just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. From the tactical AI's initial analysis, it looked like the attacks were becoming less and less successful each time, and this last one had been nothing more than a waste of ammunition. With the central intelligence of the mass constantly adapting and reacting to new stimuli, there were only so many tactics and strategies she was willing to employ. The exact limits of the Devourer intelligence were not quite known. There were certain contingency plans that could do some serious damage now, but the long-term consequences were a mystery. Noticing a slight movement out of the corner of her eye, she looked over slightly and realized the bug was still there. Letting her head rotate toward the Tomian, her crimson eyes rested on the being's face. Was there something else? Commander, the Admiral's tone wasn't intended to be harsh, but her massive size and booming voice were not well equipped to impart that intent. I do have a Corvette on station with a specialized search and rescue team in case there were any stubborn individuals who do not know when the time to evacuate has come. Allowing her muscular frame to relax slightly, the Admiral rested both of her large hands on the frame of the display and leaned forward into a more relaxed posture. Her expression had shifted slightly from that of a hardened, scowling military officer to one of exhaustion. A small yet earnest grin slipped onto her lips, and she chuckled. No, that won't be necessary. Thank you though, Verez. Binko's with him, so he'll be fine. And besides, the Admiral's grin widened slightly. If I have to go down there, pick him up, and carry him off that planet myself, I will. And I won't be as gentle as your SR team. The insectoid being moved their antennae in the Tomian equivalent of a smile and wink. Yeah, no, Achika. I think he'd actually like that. Let's not encourage him letting the mask of leadership slip even more. The grin became a full smile, followed by a short but genuine laugh. After 3 days of sleepless vigilance, even as an officer and warrior in her prime, she was starting to feel it. Standing up to her full, nearly 240 centimeters height, she wiped her face with her hands to try to scrape away the weight of worries and let out a sigh. Looking back at her friend, she couldn't wait to get back to the station so they could relax. 2 hours till your convoys jumped out of system. It may even be a bit faster. It's only the last few stragglers and military personnel who had to maintain their posts until the last civilians had left. But 2 hours just to be safe. Giving one last quick smile at her friend, the Admiral slowly moved her hands wide apart to give her friend time to brace themselves. With a sound like thunder, her giant blue hands clapped together to get the attention of all the crew on the command deck and to signal the ship AI that it was about to receive orders. With a voice just as thunderous as the clap, the Admiral Achika addressed her command staff. Evac should be out of system in 2 hours. Shift to defense pattern 23 Greedoken and enact cleanup protocols. I want every ascended being out of system in no more than 2.5 hours. Regroup at rally point 427 and jump as a group. I don't want any stragglers. We do this right. And everyone gets some well-deserved shore leave parting to attend to their own fleet. The commander left the admiral alone at her command display. This may not have been a battle with clashing blades which bards sing mighty songs of, but to the people she saved, it was a mighty victory. Though she certainly did feel for these people, and would normally be happy to extend her services to most anyone, for the right price, this was different. The Kayamayak, though fairly well known and liked among the GCC, were not especially wealthy, nor did they carry the favor usually needed to get a fleet like hers to show up. If it wasn't for her bull-headed Anishinaabe partner, the partner many of her sisters often tried to deride her for keeping, she wouldn't even be here at all. But now that she was glad to have saved so many innocent lives, even if there wasn't any profit to be made. I'm gonna run a scan real quick and make sure you didn't do nothing stupid. The hiss of air filling a vacuum was immediately audible inside of Sarah's helmet as Mick's more serious tone popped into her ear. If ya didn't, I'll even let you sit in the co-pilot seat while we make history. What the fuck are ya on about now? Seeing the green lights around the airlock doors switch from yellow to green, she flicked the latches on her helmet and pulled it off her head. Her previously compacted red mane of curls unfurled itself in strange directions as it escaped from the confines of the helmet into zero gravity. Without any sort of weight hindering it, the mass of red hair had become an amorphous blob. She tried to shake out the mess to tame it, which only resulted in an even more disjointed shape. As she clipped her helmet into its harness on her thigh, she grabbed onto the netting that covered all four walls of the airlock to steady and orient herself properly toward the door. Right when she got her bearings, the door began to slide open, and she was greeted by a plethora of odors, some pleasant and some skunky. As the door finally swung open to reveal the interior of a rather sparse docking and airlock module, Mick was in the middle of the path forward, and just over a meter from the door. His large magnetic boots anchored him to the floor, and the bulky, weighted, Martian standard red clothing did much to hide his wide frame. In his mouth sat a tobacco roll, around something far smellier. Between the hand-rolled stogie in his mouth, the massive revolver in a low hip holster, and the thin lines of black carbon fiber weaved around his left eye, it was obvious that he was going for a specific aesthetic. Sarah even thought he looked quite a bit more rugged now with those scars and that full beard. With his hands resting on his hips just so, even if one was dangerously close to a hand cannon, he definitely had a certain presence she wasn't expecting. For just a moment, she almost felt the same way she did 8 years ago. However, before she could continue that thought, Mick finally spoke up. "All right, I scanned ya, and it don't look like you're trying nothing, so I'll give ya the benefit of the doubt," Mick said with a cheeky grin. "I'll tell ya exactly what's going on once we're on the bridge and strapped in. I already set the sequence into the computer, so we got about..." Mick's left eye slightly twitched, and he glanced off for a second, "about 6-7 minutes. Throw on them boots and follow me." Mick's left arm made a slight mechanical sound as he used it to point towards a pair of magnetic boots attached to the wall next to the door. "Yeah, no, smoke on a station is illegal, right? Especially that shit you're fucking humming over there." Sarah spoke as she reoriented herself and pushed towards where the boots were mounted. Even though she was at his mercy, she couldn't help but make the obvious quip in this situation. Fuck the police. Sex semper tyrannis. Mick took a long drag and slowly let out the smoke. "We're free out here, remember. Out here, especially when you're by your lonesome like I've been for the past 6 months, the only living being that can hold you to account is you." It's important to reflect on that idea because it applies everywhere, even in the densest, most populated cities. Is that really what you've been doing out here? Just getting high, building weird shit, and philosophizing? Sarah retorted. "Yup," Mick responded with a hearty chuckle. "Well, that," and he trailed off as he took another drag of his stogie. After allowing the trail of smoke to linger in the air for just a moment, he continued, "It's surprisingly freeing not to have to worry about blowing up a whole bunch of people just because I want to play with vacuum energy." You fucking what Sarah had been in the middle of cinching up her boots when that last statement made her pause and look over at Mick with a look of shock and fear. Now she really thought floating out endlessly into the void might be better than this. At least there might be a chance of rescue. Mick, picking up on this distress, only widened his smirk. "I said I'm not going to tell ya till we're strapped in." His gaze slightly shifted away from Sarah for a split second. "We only got a couple minutes, hurry your ass up." The shift in his tone on that last bit very much told Sarah that whatever was happening, she really should be strapped in for it. Cinching the last strap as tight as she could, she pulled the boots away from the wall, deactivating the magnets, and reoriented herself to step through the airlock door. The clanging of magnetic boots locking onto a metallic floor filled the small space for a moment as Sarah swung herself into the part room, part intersection, and magnetized to the floor. Mick took a step back to give her some extra room, then another while motioning towards the path leading to the docked shuttle acting as a bridge. "Ladies first," he said with a pleasant but obviously sarcastic tone. "Oh my, ever the gentleman," she returned the sentiment with her own sarcasm and eye-rolling. Even though Sarah was trained in martial arts and more than capable of beating a man much bigger than her in a fight, Mick was a big guy who had every right to want her dead. Regardless of her capabilities, and how pleasant Mick had seemed so far, she was still concerned. The anxiety wasn't eased as he was almost breathing down her neck while they walked through the dockport, then through the cargo passenger bay of the shuttle, and finally into the cockpit. "Traitor," a sharp squawk called out before Sarah even had a chance to fully take in the sight of the haphazardly arranged instruments, readouts, monitors, and control panels. Her attention was immediately pulled towards one of the 4 seats in the cockpit, currently occupied by a small, well-padded cage containing a rather angry African gray parrot. "I thought you said you were alone." "Bitey, I missed you." Momentarily startled by the shockingly loud scream, recognition flashed in Sarah's eyes. As she stepped towards the obviously displeased and caged parrot with a hand outstretched, a deep yet quiet growl drew her attention to the other chair. "And Terry?" "Oh my lord, I missed you too." She changed her direction and moved her hand towards the massive cane corso strapped into the seat like a person. However, before she could get close enough to actually pet the beast, its snarl widened, and it made a slight motion like it was going to bite her hand if she got any closer. Pulling her hand back quickly, Sarah almost looked hurt by this. Glaring at the animals, Mick quickly interjected with a harsh tone. Knock it off, you two. I know, but why all just gotta be nice for less than an hour, and she'll be off the ship." Turning back towards Sarah and motioning towards the co-pilot seat, I figured out a basic neurosync for them. They know everything. Or, well, as much as they can understand of it. A shocked and slightly confused expression flashed across the Major's face. However, this was one of the less shocking things of the past half hour, so the shock was short-lived. Looking back at the dog and bird, she noticed something in their eyes that she couldn't remember seeing before true comprehension. This certainly wouldn't be the first neurosync she had heard of, but it was strange to see the results in person. Trying to avoid letting herself get lost in yet another existential train of thought, she moved forward, sat herself down, and began strapping in. Seeing as nearly every surface of this shuttle had been altered in some way or another, it was a relief to find that the seats and straps were standard and hadn't been modified in some strange way. Once she was fully secured, she looked over to see Mick, who was likewise strapped in and had begun pressing away at a control panel while observing a large monitor. Breathing in deeply to try to center herself and gather the courage to ask what she had gotten herself into, the still lingering smoke coming from Mick's nearly dead stogie caused her to cough slightly. Just being around someone smoking who knows what was giving her a slight head change that would probably come up in the drug test she would, no doubt, be given when she got home. Though unintentional, the cough was successful at drawing Mick's attention as he shifted his gaze over to her with an eyebrow raised questioningly. "So, y'all gonna tell me why you're all the way out at Jupiter with God knows how much metallic hydrogen and what looks like 3 stellarators?" Sarah finally managed to get out through the irritation in her throat. "Don't forget the antimatter, the what so anyways. What was that old band you liked Mick tried to move past the antimatter? 40 seconds to Mars. Something like that, 30 seconds to Mars. And what does that have to do with anything?" Sarah almost let herself get distracted for a second. "Why? Don't try to change the subject. What was that about antimatter?" This situation in her mind was going from bad to worse to absolutely horrifying. "Well, if my admittedly rough calculations are correct, it's going to be closer to 40 seconds to Mars from our current position." Mick countered with a cheeky grin as he glanced up at a monitor displaying a countdown timer. "And it looks like we got about 15 seconds till the drive starts to engage, but..." Doing the quickest, roughest calculation she could while guessing the approximate locations of Mars and Jupiter along their orbits around the Sun, she was shocked at the number that came to her mind. That's got to be something like 10 to 20 times the speed of light. How fucking high are you right now? Not high enough apparently, cause if I'm being totally honest, I'm scared shitless right now. Mick's demeanor was getting increasingly serious as he stared straight ahead with the counter slowly making its way down. A moment of silence hung in the air as Sarah stared at Mick, and Mick stared off into the void. "Welp, if we die together," Mick said, turning back to her with the first genuine smile she had seen this entire time. "If it means anything to you, I forgive you." The two just stared at each for a final moment before the counter finally clicked 0, and monitors across the shuttle began lighting up. The ship started to shake, and a feeling similar to static electricity filled the bridge as the twin stellarators spun up and began concentrating a small star's worth of energy into a space far too small to contain it. A cascade of colors formed a bubble around the ship and blocked out all of the starlight that once surrounded the vessel. With a slight thud, all 4 occupants of the bridge were pushed into their seats as the light from all the stars in front of them began to fade. At the blink of an eye, there was no more light, no more pressure, and no more vibrations, only that strange static persisted. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.